My granddaughter called me the shame of the family. But the surprise in the will left everyone in shock. They say the cruelest words often come from the people we love most. I learned this the hard way when my own granddaughter looked me straight in the eye and called me the shame of our family. Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could, and for 2 long years, they echoed in my mind every single day. But sometimes, life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. What happened after I received my terminal diagnosis and decided to write my will left everyone absolutely speechless. Today, I want to share with you how the most painful rejection of my life became the foundation for the most beautiful lesson about forgiveness I could ever imagine. My name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone used to call me Maggie. I'm 78 years old, and I've been living alone in my small house in Columbus, Ohio, for the past decade, ever since my Harold passed away. People always ask me how I managed to keep going after everything that happened, how I found peace after being rejected by my own family. The truth is, it wasn't easy. There were nights when I wondered if God had forgotten about me completely, if there was any hope left for an old woman who had made so many mistakes. You see, I wasn't always the person I am today. 10 years ago, when Harold died in that terrible car accident, something inside me broke. I had been an elementary school teacher for 35 years, always the one people came to for advice, always the rock. Everyone leaned on. But when I lost my husband, my best friend, my everything, I crumbled. The grief was so overwhelming that I couldn't breathe without feeling like my chest was being crushed. That is when I started drinking. Just a glass of wine at dinner, I told myself. Just something to help me sleep. But grief has a way of making us do things we never thought we'd do. What started as 1 glass became 2, then 3, then entire bottles. I was drowning in my sorrow, and alcohol became my lifeline, even though it was actually pulling me deeper underwater. My children started visiting less and less. My grandchildren stopped running to hug me when they saw me. I could see the disappointment in their eyes, the way they looked at me like I was a stranger wearing their grandmother ass face. But I couldn't stop. Every time I tried, the pain came rushing back like a tsunami, and I would reach for the bottle again. The worst part wasn't even the drinking itself. It was watching my family slowly drift away from me, seeing them make excuses to avoid family gatherings, hearing their whispered conversations that stopped the moment I walked into a room. I knew they were ashamed of me, but I felt powerless to change. Grief had changed me into someone I did not recognize, someone who couldn't be the grandmother, the mother, the woman I had always been. But before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you've disappointed the people you love most? Have you ever wondered if there is still hope for healing after you've caused so much pain? If you are watching this video, I imagine you might be searching for answers just like I was. Please, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I read every single comment, and I want you to know that whatever you are going through, you are not alone. Share your thoughts with me, because sometimes the most healing thing we can do is connect with others who understand our pain. The turning point came during my granddaughter Emily True's 16th birthday party. It was October, and the leaves were just starting to turn those beautiful autumn colors that Ohio is famous for. My daughter Sarah had reluctantly invited me, probably because she felt guilty about excluding me from family events. I remember getting ready that morning, trying so hard to look presentable, to be the grandmother Emily deserved. I had bought her a beautiful necklace, something I had saved up for months to afford. I was determined to make this day special, to show my family that I could still be the woman they remembered. But by the time the party started, I had already been drinking. Not enough to be obviously drunk, or so I thought, but enough to feel that familiar numbing sensation that had become my constant companion. I watched all the other grandparents interacting easily with their grandchildren, saw the way they laughed together, the way they belonged. I felt like an outsider looking in on a life that used to be mine. Emily looked so beautiful that day, wearing a blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. She was surrounded by friends, laughing and taking pictures, being the center of attention the way 16-year-old girls should be. I wanted so badly to be part of that happiness, to feel connected to her joy instead of feeling like I was watching it from behind a glass wall. When it came time to cut the cake, I got up to help carry it to the table. That has when everything went wrong. I had been sitting for a while, and when I stood up, the room spun slightly. I should have sat back down, should have asked for help, but I was so desperate to contribute something meaningful to the celebration. I wanted to be useful, to be the grandmother who helped make the day special. Instead, I stumbled. The beautiful 3-layer cake, decorated with pink roses and Emily's name in elegant script, went flying out of my hands. It crashed to the floor in a mess of frosting and crumbs, and the entire party fell silent. The look on Emily's face in that moment still haunts me. It wasn't just disappointment or frustration. It was something deeper, something that looked like heartbreak mixed with disgust. All of her friends were staring, some with their phones out, recording what should have been a celebration but had become a humiliation. I tried to clean up the mess, apologizing over and over, but my hands were shaking and I was making it worse. That S when Emily finally spoke. Her voice was quiet at first, but it carried across the silent room like a thunderclap. She said, "Grandma, please stop. Just stop." But I kept trying to fix what I had broken, kept apologizing, kept making everything worse. And that says when she said the words that would change everything between us forever. "You're not my grandma anymore," she said, her voice getting louder and stronger. "You're just a pathetic drunk who ruins everything. You're the shame of our family, and I wish you would just disappear." The room was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Even the teenagers who had been laughing and chattering moments before stood frozen in shock. I looked around at my family, hoping someone would defend me, would tell Emily that her words were too harsh. But instead, I saw something even more devastating. I saw agreement in their eyes. They didn't say anything, but they didn't need to. Their silence spoke volumes. I left that party feeling like I had died inside. The drive home was a blur of tears and self-loathing. I had not only ruined my granddaughter Aya's special day, but I had also confirmed every terrible thing my family believed about me. I was ashamed to them. I was someone they wished would disappear. And the worst part was, I couldn't even argue with them. Emily was right. I had become exactly what she said I was. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I replayed that scene over and over in my mind, seeing Emily's face, hearing her words, feeling the weight of my family. It's disappointment. I stopped answering my phone, stopped checking my mail, stopped doing anything except sitting in Harold's old chair and numbing the pain with alcohol. I told myself that if my family wanted me to disappear, maybe I should just grant their wish. But sometimes, when we're at our lowest point, something inside us refuses to give up completely. Maybe it is survival instinct, maybe it is stubborn pride, or maybe it is something deeper. For me, it was the memory of who I used to be. I remembered the woman who had taught hundreds of children, who had been Harold's partner for 40 years, who had raised 3 children and been a pillar of strength for so many people. That woman was still somewhere inside me, buried under layers of grief and alcohol and shame. It took me months to find the courage to seek help. I started attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings at a community center about 20 minutes from my house, far enough away that I wouldn't to run into anyone I knew. Sitting in those circles, listening to other people's stories, I began to understand that I wasn't uniquely broken. Addiction doesn't discriminate. It takes teachers and doctors and grandmothers and turns them into shadows of themselves. Slowly, one day at a time, I began to climb out of the hole I had dug for myself. I stopped drinking, which was the hardest thing I had ever done. The grief was still there, raw and overwhelming. But I learned to face it without the numbing effects of alcohol. I started reading again, something I had always loved but had abandoned during my darkest years. I began taking walks in the morning, feeling the sun on my face and remembering what it was like to be present in the world. But even as I got sober, even as I started to feel like myself again, the damage to my family relationships seemed irreparable. My children would answer my calls, but the conversations were stilted and brief. My grandchildren were polite but distant when we occasionally crossed paths. And Emily, my dear Emily, wouldn't even look at me when we were in the same room. I wrote her letters that I never sent, pouring out my heart, explaining my grief, apologizing for the pain I had caused. I must have written 50 different versions of the same letter, each one trying to find the right words to bridge the gap between us. But every time I sealed an envelope, I would lose my courage and add it to the pile in my desk drawer. What if she threw it away without reading it? What if she read it and confirmed that she never wanted to see me again? The fear of final rejection kept me silent. This went on for 2 years. 2 years of sobriety, of slowly rebuilding my life, of trying to find purpose and meaning in each day. I started volunteering at a local literacy program, helping adults learn to read. It felt good to be useful again, to use my teaching skills for something positive. I also began attending a small church about 10 minutes from my house, finding comfort in the familiar hymns and the message of redemption and second chances. The pastor at that church, Reverend Williams, was a kind man who seemed to understand that healing takes time. He never pushed me to share my story, but he always made sure I felt welcome. It was in his quiet, steady presence that I began to explore what forgiveness might mean. Not just being forgiven by others, but learning to forgive myself and even forgive those who had hurt me. It was during one of those quiet Sunday mornings, sitting in the third pew from the back, that I first considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could forgive Emily for those words that had cut so deep. The idea seemed impossible at first. How could I forgive someone who had rejected me so completely? How could I let go of the hurt that had shaped my every day for 2 years? But as I sat there, listening to Reverend Williams talk about the power of forgiveness to heal both the forgiver and the forgiven, something shifted inside me. I began to understand that holding on to my hurt was like carrying a heavy stone everywhere I went. It was exhausting, and it was not changing anything. Emily's words had been cruel, but they had come from a place of pain too. She had watched her beloved grandmother disappear into addiction, had seen me hurt our family over and over again. Maybe her cruelty had been her way of protecting herself from more disappointment. That realization didn't make the words hurt less, but it helped me see them differently. Instead of seeing Emily as someone who had deliberately wounded me, I began to see her as someone who had been wounded too. We had both lost something that day of her 16th birthday. She had lost the grandmother she remembered, and I had lost the connection to the granddaughter I adored. As the weeks passed, I found myself thinking about Emily more and more. I wondered what she was doing, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about me. I heard through my daughter Sarah that Emily had started college, that she was studying to become a nurse. The pride I felt hearing that news was mixed with sadness that I wasn't part of her life to celebrate these milestones. It was around this time that I started having some health issues. Nothing dramatic at first, just fatigue and some pain that I attributed to getting older. But when the symptoms persisted, my doctor encouraged me to have some tests done. I went through the motions, not particularly worried, assuming it would be something minor that could be managed with medication or lifestyle changes. I was not prepared for what the doctor told me when the results came back. The room seemed to spin as she explained the diagnosis, the prognosis, the limited treatment options. Cancer, she said, advanced, aggressive, and with my age and overall health, not something that could be cured. I had maybe 6 months, possibly less. Sitting in that sterile office, hearing those words, I felt strangely calm. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was acceptance. I had lived 78 years, had loved and been loved, had made mistakes and tried to make amends. If this was how my story was going to end, I could accept that. But as I drove home from the Dr. E.'s office, one thought kept circling in my mind. I did not want to die with things unresolved between Emily and me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper and began writing what I knew would be my final letter to Emily. This time, I didn't hold back. I told her everything about my grief over losing Harold, about how the drinking had been my way of trying to escape pain that felt unbearable, about how sorry I was for ruining her birthday and causing her embarrassment. I told her about getting sober, about learning to forgive myself, and about how much I loved her despite everything that had happened between us. But most importantly, I told her that I forgave her for those words that had haunted me for 2 years. I explained that I understood why she had said them, that I did not blame her for protecting herself from someone who had repeatedly let her down. I told her that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or pretending the hurt hadn't happened, but about choosing to let love be stronger than anger. I sealed that letter and put it in my purse, intending to mail it the next day. But as I was getting ready for bed, something made me hesitate. What if there was a chance, however small, that Emily might want to see me? What if she had been carrying her own burden of regret all these years? What if we could find a way to heal together instead of apart? The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of mailing the letter, I decided to do something I hadn't done in 2 years. I was going to call Emily directly. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might stop. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and I almost hung up. But then I heard her voice, cautious and surprised, saying hello. "Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It is Grandma. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I have something important to tell you, and I'm hoping you will give me just a few minutes of your time." There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, "Grandma, is everything okay?" How and that ease when I realized that despite everything that had happened between us, despite the harsh words and the years of silence, she still cared enough to be concerned about my well-being. In that moment, I felt the first real spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for us after all. But what happened next would surprise both of us in ways we never could have imagined. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for what felt like eternity. I could hear Emily breathing, could almost feel her internal struggle through the telephone line. When she finally spoke, her voice was different than I remembered, more mature, but also carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. "Grandma, I've been thinking about you lately," she said quietly. "I heard from Mom that you've been doing better, that you stopped drinking. I wanted to call, but I didn't know what to say." My heart nearly stopped. Emily had been thinking about me? After all this time, after all the pain, she had wanted to reach out. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I forced myself to stay focused on why I had called. "Emily, sweetheart, I need to tell you something important. I just came from the doctor, and I've been diagnosed with cancer. It's advanced, and I don't have much time left." The gasp I heard through the phone was like a knife to my heart. "Grandma, no. Oh my God, no. How long do you have?" "Maybe 6 months, possibly less. But Emily, I am not calling to make you feel sorry for me. I am calling because I need you to know that I love you, and I forgive you for what you said at your birthday party. I understand why you said those things, and I don't want either of us to carry that burden anymore." What followed was the sound of crying. Not the angry, frustrated tears of a teenager, but the deep, soul-wrenching sobs of someone who had been carrying guilt for far too long. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I've regretted those words every single day for 2 years. I was so angry and hurt, and I wanted to hurt you back, but I never meant, I never wanted. I know, sweetheart, I know. We both said and did things we regret, but I'm calling because I want us to find peace before it is too late. Would you be willing to come see me? I have something I want to give you." There was another long pause, and then Emily said something that gave me more hope than I had felt in years. "I'll be there tomorrow, Grandma. I love you too." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Emily's voice, about the pain I had heard there, about the possibility that we might actually be able to heal the wounds between us. I spent hours going through old photo albums, remembering the little girl who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read her stories. I remembered teaching her to bake cookies, watching her perform in school plays, braiding her hair before church on Sundays. The next morning, I cleaned my house from top to bottom, even though I knew Emily wouldn't care about dust on the furniture. I made her favorite cookies, the ones with chocolate chips and a hint of vanilla that she had loved since she was tiny. I put on my best dress, the blue one that Harold had always said brought out my eyes, and I waited. When the doorbell rang at exactly 2:00 o'clock, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the knob. But there she was, my beautiful granddaughter, standing on my doorstep with tears in her eyes and flowers in her hands. "Grandma," she whispered, and then she was in my arms, and we were both crying and holding each other like we might never let go. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had written all those unsent letters, and we talked. Really talked, perhaps for the first time in years. Emily told me about college, about her studies to become a nurse, about how she had chosen that career partly because she wanted to help people the way she wished she could have helped me during my darkest time. "I felt so helpless watching you struggle," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was just a kid, and I didn't understand addiction or grief or any of it. All I knew was that my grandma, who had always been my safe place, was gone, and this stranger was in her place. I was scared and angry, and I didn't know how to handle those feelings. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. Emily, you were 16 years old. You shouldn't have had to handle those feelings. I was the adult, and I failed you. I failed all of you. But Grandma, I said such cruel things. I called you names. I told you I wished you would disappear. Those words have haunted me every day since then. Ivy wanted to apologize so many times, but I was too ashamed. I was afraid you would never forgive me. Oh, sweetheart, I said, squeezing her hand gently. I forgave you a long time ago. Sitting in church, listening to sermons about forgiveness and grace, I realized that holding on to anger was only hurting me more. You were in pain, and you lashed out from that pain. I understand that now. We talked for hours that afternoon. Emily told me about her boyfriends, her dreams, her fears about the future. I told her about my recovery, about the support groups, about how I had learned to live with grief without drowning in it. We shared memories of Harold, of family holidays, of all the good times that had been overshadowed by the bad. As the sun began to set, Emily looked at me with those same bright eyes I remembered from her childhood. Grandma, I want to help you through this. I want to be here for you, like you were always there for me when I was little. Will you let me? I felt my heart fill with a joy I hadn't experienced in years. I would like that very much, sweetheart. But first, there is something I need to show you. I led her to my bedroom, to the old wooden chest where I kept my most precious belongings. From it, I pulled out a manila envelope that contained my will and testament. I had updated it just the week before, after receiving my diagnosis. Emily, I want you to know that I am leaving everything to you. The house, my savings, Harold A.S. life insurance money that I never touched. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to help you finish college and get started in your career. Emily's eyes widened in shock. Grandma, I can accept that. What about Mom and Uncle Dave and Aunt Susan? They were your children. And my children are grown and established. They have their own homes, their own savings. You were just starting your life, and I want to give you the best possible foundation. But more than that, I want you to understand why I am doing this. I sat down on the edge of my bed and patted the space beside me. Emily sat down, still looking overwhelmed by what I had told her. Sweetheart, this inheritance isn't about money. It is about forgiveness. For 2 years, I carried the weight of your words, and you carried the weight of guilt for saying them. We both allowed that moment to define our relationship, to steal our joy and our connection. I am leaving you this inheritance because I want you to remember that forgiveness is the most valuable gift we can give each other. Emily was crying again, but these were different tears. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of love restored. Grandma, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve your forgiveness or your generosity. None of us deserve grace, Emily. That is what makes it grace. We give it and receive it not because we've earned it, but because love is stronger than our mistakes. I am giving you this, not because you deserve it, but because I love you, and because I want you to learn what I've learned about the power of forgiveness. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a constant presence in my life. She would come over after her classes, bringing her textbooks and studying at my kitchen table while I cooked dinner. She helped me organize my affairs, go through old belongings, and prepare for what was to come. But more than that, she helped me heal from years of isolation and regret. We established new traditions during those precious weeks. Sunday morning church together, followed by lunch at the little diner downtown. Wednesday evening walks around the neighborhood, talking about everything and nothing. Friday night movie marathons, just like when she was little, complete with popcorn and hot chocolate. It was during one of these movie nights that Emily brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. Grandma, I need to tell you something. After what happened at my birthday party, I was so angry and hurt that I told the rest of the family they should cut you off completely. I said we were better off without you. I influenced their decision to exclude you from holidays and family gatherings. I felt a familiar pang of hurt, but it was different now. It was the pain of understanding rather than the pain of rejection. Emily, why are you telling me this? Because I need you to forgive me for that too. It wasn't just the words I said to you that night. It was everything that came after. I turned the family against you, and I've been carrying that guilt for 2 years. I need to know that you can forgive me for that as well. I looked at this young woman who had grown so much in such a short time, who was brave enough to confess her deepest shame, and I felt nothing but love and admiration for her courage. Emily, I forgive you for all of it. Every word, every action, every moment of pain. I forgive you completely, and I need you to forgive yourself too. We cannot change what happened, but we can choose how we move forward. That night, after Emily had gone home, I sat in Harold's old chair and reflected on the miracle that had taken place in my life. Just a few weeks ago, I had been alone, isolated, preparing to die with my greatest relationships broken and unhealed. Now, I had my granddaughter back, and with her, I had rediscovered the power of love to overcome even the deepest wounds. But there was still something troubling me. While Emily and I had found our way back to each other, the rest of my family remained distant. My children still kept their conversations with me brief and formal. My other grandchildren were polite but reserved. I understood their caution. I had hurt them all, and trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. It was Emily who suggested that we needed to address this as a family. Grandma, they need to know that you were dying. They need to have the chance to say goodbye, to make peace if they want to. And they need to understand that holding on to anger is only hurting them. The idea of facing my entire family terrified me. What if they rejected me again? What if they couldn't find it in their hearts to forgive? What if my last memories of them were filled with recrimination and anger? But Emily held my hand and said, Grandma, you taught me that forgiveness isn't about the other person's response. It is about freeing ourselves from the prison of resentment. You've already forgiven them, right? So whatever they choose to do with that forgiveness is their decision, not yours. Her wisdom astounded me. Somewhere along the way, my granddaughter had become my teacher, showing me depths of understanding that I was still learning to explore. We decided to invite the family over for Thanksgiving dinner. It would be my last Thanksgiving, and I wanted to spend it surrounded by the people I loved most, regardless of whether they were ready to fully reconcile with me. The phone calls were awkward and painful. My daughter Sarah was hesitant, clearly worried about creating more family drama. My son Dave was more direct, asking if I was ready to behave myself at a family gathering. My youngest, Susan, cried when she heard about my diagnosis, but she also expressed anger that I was only telling them now. But Emily was my champion through it all. She called each family member separately, explaining what had happened between us, how we had found our way back to each other, and how much it would mean to me to have everyone together one last time. Slowly, reluctantly, they all agreed to come. The days leading up to Thanksgiving were filled with preparation and anticipation. Emily and I cooked together, making all the traditional dishes that had been family favorites for generations. We cleaned the house, set the table with Harold's grandmother's china, and prepared for what would either be a beautiful reunion or a painful goodbye. I spent hours that week writing letters to each family member, letters that I planned to give them after dinner. In each letter, I acknowledged the specific ways I had hurt them, apologized for my failures, and expressed my love for them. I also shared what I had learned about forgiveness, about grace, about the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds. The night before Thanksgiving, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the Thanksgivings we had shared over the years, about the laughter and love that had filled this house during happier times. I wondered if it was possible to recapture even a fraction of that joy, or if too much damage had been done. Emily stayed with me that night, sleeping in the guest room that had once been her mother's childhood bedroom. Having her there gave me strength and comfort, reminding me that healing was possible, that love could triumph over hurt if we were brave enough to choose it. Thanksgiving morning dawned gray and cold, with the promise of snow in the air. Emily and I worked together in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on our feast. The turkey was golden brown, The stuffing was perfectly seasoned, and the apple pie cooling on the counter filled the house with the scent of cinnamon and home. At exactly 1 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My heart was pounding as I opened the door to find my entire family standing on my doorstep, looking as nervous and uncertain as I felt. "Come in," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome home." What happened next would test everything I had learned about forgiveness, about grace, about the power of love to heal even the most broken relationships. The afternoon would be filled with tears, with difficult conversations, with moments of pain and moments of unexpected joy. But it would also be filled with something I had almost given up hope of experiencing again: the possibility of redemption, the chance to transform our deepest wounds into bridges of understanding and love. As my family gathered around the table that had witnessed so many memories, both happy and sad, I prepared to share with them the most important lesson I had learned in my 78 years of life. It was a lesson about forgiveness, about grace, about the incredible power of love to overcome even our greatest failures. And as we joined hands to say grace over our Thanksgiving meal, I felt Harold A.'s presence with us, reminding me that love never dies. It just transforms into something deeper and more beautiful than we ever imagined possible. The silence around the table was heavy with unspoken words and years of accumulated hurt. My son Dave cleared his throat awkwardly. My daughter Sarah kept glancing at Emily as if seeking guidance, and my youngest daughter Susan stared at her plate with tears in her eyes. The grandchildren sat quietly, unsure of how to navigate this emotional minefield. "Let us say grace," I said softly, extending my hands to Emily on my right and to Dave on my left. Slowly, reluctantly, the circle formed. Some hands were warm and willing, others were stiff and hesitant, but we were connected. "Dear Lord," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "we thank you for this food, for this family, and for the opportunity to be together. We ask for your blessing on this meal and on our hearts. Help us to find the courage to speak truth with love, to listen with compassion, and to forgive as we have been forgiven. Amen." The chorus of amens was quiet and uncertain, but it was a beginning. As we began to eat, the conversation was stilted and careful. We talked about safe topics, the weather, Emily's studies, the grandchildren's schools. But underneath the surface politeness, I could feel the tension building. There were things that needed to be said, wounds that needed to be addressed, and I knew that avoiding them would only make this gathering feel hollow and meaningless. It was Sarah who finally broke through the pretense. She set down her fork and looked directly at me, her eyes filled with years of frustration and pain. "Mom, I need to understand something. Emily told us that you two have worked things out, that you've forgiven each other. But what about us? What about all the times you promised you would stop drinking and then showed up drunk to family events? What about the times we had to explain to our children why Grandma was acting strange? What about all the broken promises and the lies?" And the table fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. This was the moment I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "Sarah, you were right to be angry. You were right to question whether things can really change. I broke your trust over and over again, and I understand why it is hard for you to believe that this time is different." I paused, gathering my courage for what I needed to say next. "I can undo the past. I can take back the embarrassment I caused you, the stress I put on your marriages, the confusion I created for your children. All I can do is acknowledge that I failed you as a mother and ask for your forgiveness, knowing that I don't deserve it." Dave leaned forward, his voice tight with emotion. "Mom, do you have any idea what it was like watching you destroy yourself? Do you know how many times we thought we were going to get a call that you had died? How many times we had to choose between protecting our own families and trying to help you? I know, son. I know I put you in an impossible position. I know I made you choose between me and your own well-being, and I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry." Susan, who had been quietly crying throughout the meal, finally spoke up. "Mom, I loved you so much. You were my hero when I was little. You taught me to be strong, to be independent, to stand up for what is right. Watching you fall apart was like watching my foundation crumble. I didn't know how to help you, and I felt like I was failing you the way you were failing us." The pain in her voice was almost unbearable. I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling her resistance before she finally allowed the contact. Susan, sweetheart, you didn't fail me. None of you failed me. I failed myself, and in doing so, I failed all of you. My addiction was my responsibility, not yours. You couldn't have saved me from something I wasn't ready to be saved from. One by one, my family members began to share their pain, their anger, their confusion about what had happened to me and to us. My grandchildren, who had been mostly silent, began to open up about how they had felt watching their parents struggle with my behavior, how they had missed having a normal grandmother, how they had been embarrassed to bring friends around during family gatherings. It was excruciating to hear, but it was also necessary. For too long, we'd all been carrying these wounds in silence, letting them fester and grow. Now finally, we were lanced the wound and let the poison out. I want you all to know, I said when everyone had finished sharing, that getting sober wasn't just about stopping drinking. It was about learning to face the pain that drove me to drink in the first place. It was about learning to forgive myself for losing Harold, for not being strong enough to grieve properly, for letting my pain hurt all of you. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking slightly, and walked to the sideboard where I had placed the letters I had written to each family member. I've written each of you a letter, I said, beginning to distribute them. In these letters, I've tried to address the specific ways I hurt you, and I've shared what I've learned about forgiveness and healing. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever, but I needed you to know that I see the pain I caused, and I take full responsibility for it. As my family members opened their letters and began to read, I saw a range of emotions cross their faces. Tears, anger, surprise, and slowly, something that looked like the beginning of understanding. Sarah was the first to finish reading. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. Mom, in this letter, you mentioned that you forgave Emily for what she said to you, but you also say that you forgave all of us for cutting you out of our lives. I don't understand. We were the ones who were hurt. Why do you need to forgive us? Because, I said, sitting back down. I realized that holding on to anger about being excluded was keeping me in a prison of resentment. When I forgave you for protecting yourselves and your families from my destructive behavior, I freed myself from the bitterness that was eating me alive. Forgiveness isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about choosing love over anger, peace over resentment. Dave folded his letter carefully and placed it beside his plate. Mom, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is this real? This change in you? This clarity about forgiveness and healing? Or is this just another manipulation, another way to get us to let our guard down? His question cut deep, but I understood why he had to ask it. I had manipulated them before, had made promises I couldn't keep, had used their love for me against them. Dave, I can prove to you that this is real. All I can do is tell you that I've been sober for 2 years, that I've done the hard work of examining my behavior and my motivations, and that I've learned to find peace, even in the face of consequences. I can change. Whether you choose to believe me or not is up to you, and I'll respect whatever decision you make. Emily, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. Uncle Dave, I was the angriest one of all of you. I said the cruelest things to Grandma, and I convinced all of you to cut her off completely. But when I spent time with her these past few weeks, I saw something different. I saw someone who had genuinely changed, who had found peace, not because her circumstances had improved, but because she had learned to carry pain differently. She paused, looking around the table at each family member. Grandma didn't ask me to forgive her, because she wanted something from me. She forgave me first, without knowing if I would ever forgive her back. That is not manipulation. That is grace. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of people processing truth, of hearts beginning to soften, of defenses slowly coming down. It was my grandson Michael, Sarah Eto's oldest boy, who spoke next. Grandma, I remember when Grandpa Harold died. I was only 12, but I remember how sad you were. I remember wanting to help you but not knowing how. When you started drinking, I was scared. I thought you were going to die too, and I couldn't handle losing another grandparent. My heart broke for this young man who had carried such a heavy burden at such a young age. Michael, I'm so sorry you had to be afraid like that. You were just a child, and you should have been able to grieve your grandfather's death without worrying about losing me too. But Grandma, he continued, I also remember how you used to be before Grandpa died. You were the one who taught me to ride a bike, who helped me with my math homework, who always had time to listen to my problems. Ivy missed that Grandma so much. One by one, my other grandchildren began to share their memories, both the good ones from before Harold EY's death and the painful ones from the years of my addiction. They talked about feeling confused and abandoned, but also about missing the relationship we used to have. As the afternoon wore on, something miraculous began to happen. The wall of anger and resentment that had separated us for so long began to crumble. It did not happen all at once, and it was incomplete, but there were cracks of light breaking through the darkness. Susan was the first to stand up and walk around the table to hug me. Mom, I cannot promise that I'll ever fully trust you again. The hurt goes too deep for that, but I can promise that I'll try to forgive you because carrying this anger has been exhausting. Dave was more hesitant, but he eventually reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Mom, I need time to process all of this, but I am grateful that you were sober, and I am grateful that you were fighting for our family. Sarah was the most reserved, but even she managed to say, Mom, I see that you were trying. I see that you'd be different. I just need time to figure out what that means for us. As the sun began to set and it became clear that our Thanksgiving meal was coming to an end, I knew there was one more thing I needed to share with them. It was the biggest surprise of all, and it would either be the final bridge to healing or the thing that drove us apart forever. And before you all leave, I said, standing up again, there is something else I need to tell you. Something about my will and about what I want to happen after I am gone. The room tensed immediately. Money and inheritance have a way of bringing out the worst in families, and I could see the wariness in their eyes. A few weeks ago, I updated my will. I've left everything, the house, my savings, Harold E.'s life insurance money, to Emily. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Sarah's face went white, Dave's jaw dropped, and Susan looked like she had been slapped. Even some of the grandchildren looked shocked and hurt. Mom, what are you thinking? Sarah demanded. Emily is just one grandchild. What about the rest of us? What about your own children? Let me explain, I said, holding up my hand. I'm not leaving everything to Emily because I love her more than the rest of you. I am leaving it to her because she taught me the most important lesson of my life. I looked around the table at my family, seeing confusion and hurt in their faces. Emily was the one who hurt me the most. She was the one who called me the shame of the family, who wished I would disappear. For 2 years I carried those words like a poison in my heart. But Emily was also the one who taught me that forgiveness isn't about fairness or justice. It is about choosing love over anger, grace over resentment. I paused, seeing that they were listening even if they weren't understanding. When Emily came to see me after my diagnosis, she was carrying just as much pain as I was. She had been living with guilt and regret for 2 years, just like I had been living with hurt and anger. When we forgave each other, we both experienced a freedom that I can even describe. I walked over to Emily and placed my hand on her shoulder. Emily, tell them what you told me about the inheritance. Emily looked uncomfortable, but stood up to face her family. I told Grandma that I couldn't accept the inheritance. I told her it should go to her children, to all of us equally. But she explained to me that this wasn't about money. It was about the lesson. What lesson? Dave asked, his voice tight with emotion. It was my turn to speak again. The lesson that forgiveness is the most valuable gift we can give each other. The lesson that love is stronger than hurt, that grace is more powerful than anger, that healing is possible even when we think it's too late. I looked around the table at each face, seeing the beginning of understanding in some eyes, continued resistance in others. I'm not leaving Emily money. I'm leaving her a responsibility. The responsibility to remember what we learned together about forgiveness and to share that lesson with future generations. I am leaving her the resources to build a life that honors the power of second chances. Susan was crying again, but this time her tears seemed different. Mom, I think I understand what you were trying to do, but it still hurts. It still feels like you were choosing Emily over the rest of us. I am not choosing Emily over you, I said gently. I am choosing forgiveness over resentment. I am choosing healing over hurt. And I am trusting that all of you will understand that this decision comes from love, not from favoritism. The room was quiet again, but I could see people processing what I had said. Slowly, remarkably, Sarah began to nod her head. Mom, I think I get it. You were not rewarding Emily for forgiving you. You were rewarding the act of forgiveness itself. You were saying that the courage to forgive, to heal, to choose love over anger is worth more than money. Exactly, I said, feeling a surge of hope. And I am hoping that all of you will learn from Emily Wang's example. I am hoping that you will find the courage to forgive me, to forgive each other, and most importantly, to forgive yourselves for any ways you feel you failed during the hardest years of our family's life. What happened next was something I will treasure for the rest of my days. One by one, my family members began to stand up, to move around the table, to embrace each other, and to embrace me. It wasn't a complete healing. That would take time and continued effort. But it was a beginning. It was the first step toward becoming a family again. Michael was the first to hug me, followed by my other grandchildren. Then Susan, then Dave, and finally Sarah. Each hug was different. Some were hesitant, some were desperate, some were filled with tears, but all of them were filled with love. Mom, Sarah said as she held me, I cannot promise that everything will be perfect from now on, but I can promise that I'll try to learn from what you and Emily have shown us. I'll try to choose forgiveness over anger. As my family prepared to leave that evening, there was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there in years. People were talking and laughing together, making plans to see each other again soon. The children were running around the house, playing in spaces that had been silent for too long. Emily was the last to leave, staying behind to help me clean up and to process what had happened. Grandma, she said, as we washed dishes together, I am still not sure about accepting the inheritance. It feels like too much responsibility. Emily, the inheritance is not about the money. It's about the lesson. It's about remembering that forgiveness is the most powerful force in the world, and that love can triumph over any hurt if we are brave enough to choose it. I dried my hands and turned to face her. But more than that, it's about hope. It is about the belief that even when things seem completely broken, healing is possible. That is what you gave me, sweetheart. You gave me hope when I thought it was too late. That night, after Emily had gone home, I sat in Harold's chair and reflected on the miracle that had occurred. Just a few months ago, I had been alone, estranged from my family, preparing to die in isolation. Now, I was surrounded by love, connected to the people who mattered most, and leaving behind a legacy of forgiveness and healing. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of contentment, of completion, of a life well lived despite its imperfections. I spent the next few weeks putting my affairs in order and spending precious time with my family. We had more meals together, more conversations, more opportunities to practice the art of forgiveness and grace. It wasn't always easy, old wounds done, to heal overnight, but we were committed to the process. Emily continued to visit regularly, and we spent hours talking about life, about love, about the legacy we want to leave behind. She had decided to specialize in addiction counseling as part of her nursing studies, inspired by our journey together. Grandma, she said one afternoon as we sat on my front porch watching the snow fall, I want to use the inheritance to help other families like ours. Families that have been broken by addiction, by harsh words, by years of accumulated hurt. I want to create a program that teaches people about forgiveness and healing. My heart swelled with pride and love. Emily, that's exactly what I hoped you would do. That is exactly why I knew you were the right person to carry this forward. As winter deepened and my health began to decline more rapidly, I found myself thinking often about the journey that had brought me to this place. I thought about Harold and how proud he would be of the woman I had become in my final months. I thought about my family and how grateful I was that we had found our way back to each other before it was too late. But mostly, I thought about the power of forgiveness to transform even the most broken relationships, to bring healing where there seemed to be only hurt, to create hope where there had been only despair. On a quiet Tuesday morning in February, as snow continued to fall outside my bedroom window, I passed away peacefully in my sleep. Emily was there, holding my hand, along with Sarah and Dave and Susan. My last words were simple. Forgiveness is the key to everything. Remember that. Teach that. Live that. At my funeral, the small church was packed with people whose lives I had touched over the years. Former students, neighbors, members of my recovery group, and of course, my family. Emily delivered the eulogy, speaking about the lesson I had taught her about forgiveness, about the power of love to overcome even the deepest wounds. But the most powerful moment came when she read from the letter I had left for her, to be opened after my death. My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, then I am at peace, and I hope you are too. I want you to know that forgiving you was the easy part. Learning to forgive myself was the real challenge. But you taught me that forgiveness isn't about perfection. It is about grace. It is about choosing love over anger, hope over despair, healing over hurt. Use the inheritance well, my darling. Not just the money, but the lesson. Teach others what we learned together. Show them that it is never too late to heal, never too late to forgive, never too late to choose love. And remember, whenever you doubt yourself, whenever you wonder if forgiveness is worth it, think of us. Think of how our broken relationship became beautiful again through the power of grace. I love you always, Grandma Maggie. As Emily finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. People were crying, but they were also smiling, touched by the story of redemption and healing that had unfolded in the final months of my life. In the weeks and months that followed, Emily kept her promise. She used the inheritance to establish the Margaret Thompson Foundation for Family Healing, a program that helps families broken by addiction and other traumas learn the art of forgiveness and reconciliation. The Foundation's motto, inspired by the lesson I had learned, is simple but profound. Forgiveness is not about forgetting the past. It is about freeing the future. And so, my story of pain and healing, of broken relationships and restored love, continues to touch lives long after I am gone. It serves as a reminder that no matter how deep the hurt, no matter how long the estrangement, no matter how impossible healing seems, love and forgiveness are always stronger than anger and resentment. If you are watching this video because you're struggling with forgiveness in your own life, because you've been hurt by someone you love, or because you've hurt someone you care about, I want you to know that healing is possible. It is not easy, and it does not happen overnight, but it is possible. Forgiveness is not about excusing bad behavior or pretending that hurt didn't happen. It's about choosing to let love be stronger than anger, choosing to let grace be more powerful than resentment. It's about giving yourself the gift of freedom from the prison of bitterness. And remember, forgiveness is not just something we give to others. It is something we give to ourselves. Some of the hardest people to forgive are ourselves, but that forgiveness is just as important, just as healing, just as necessary. My name was Margaret Thompson, and this was my story of how the cruelest words ever spoken to me became the foundation for the most beautiful lesson about forgiveness I could ever imagine. I hope it brings healing to your heart, hope to your situation, and courage to choose love over anger in your own life. Because in the end, that is what makes all the difference. That is what transforms shame into grace, hurt into healing, and broken relationships into beautiful testimonies of the power of love to overcome anything. May you find the courage to forgive, the strength to heal, and the peace that comes from choosing love over anger today and always.